In the news tonight, His Majesty the King joins ex-servicemen at a ceremony marking National Veterans Day. The Foreign Minister and the U.S. Secretary of State say efforts should be stepped up to kickstart Middle East peace talks and call for a political solution in Syria. And the Syrian refugee population in the kingdom is rapidly growing, with an average of 2,000 crossing every day. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. His Majesty the King joined a ceremony organized by the Economic and Social Association of the Retired Servicemen and Veterans to mark National Veterans Day. Addressing the ceremony held on Dead Sea shores, Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour thanked the King for designating a day for retired servicemen and veterans in recognition of their services. He pointed to the sacrifices of ex-servicemen in the service of the Arab nation's causes and in defense of national security and stability. The Prime Minister referred to support of the association by the King, who yesterday announced he would donate 1 million dinars to help it improve services to retired military officers. Last year, the King Abdullah directed the government to designate February the 15th as a National Veterans Day in recognition of the services of retired military personnel. The Middle East peace process and Syria figured high during talks in Washington between Foreign Minister Nasser Jude and U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry. Jude briefed Kerry on reforms Jordan had taken, saying consultations are underway with the lower house to form a parliamentary government. Kerry hailed last month's parliamentary elections in the kingdom as a success. The two men agreed on the need to exert all possible efforts to kickstart Palestinian-Israeli peace talks according to the two-state solution. Jude said Jordan had to bear a huge burden by receiving a massive influx of Syrian refugees, and both men said the bloodshed in Syria should stop.
We discussed a wide range of issues and exchanged ideas on key developments in the region, particularly the Middle East peace, the situation in Syria, and as the Secretary very kindly and accurately described, we have been at the receiving end of the humanitarian spillover of the ongoing crisis in Syria, with over 360,000 Syrians on Jordanian soil, and this is only since the crisis began in March 2011. As the Secretary pointed out, about 90,000 happen to be in camps, but the rest are in Jordanian towns, villages, living in Jordanian homes. And while we have taken the political decision at His Majesty's directives to keep our borders open to receive those Syrian brothers and sisters who are escaping these harsh and horrific realities on the ground, it does not come without a toll on our already drained and burdened economy. I also had the opportunity to brief Secretary Kerry on the milestone elections that we had, on the latest developments in our political reform process, which is led by His Majesty King Abdullah II. But most importantly, given the results of the elections that took place 3 weeks ago, the consultation process that is taking place as we speak in order to form our next government, leading to consensual, more representative parliamentary governments. This process is irreversible. The Secretary knows the details from his conversation with His Majesty this morning and previous conversations, and knows His Majesty's commitment to continuing on the path of reforms.
I also want to underscore the very important historic relationship that we have had with Jordan. We talked about the important milestone that has been passed in Jordan because of the elections that they've held. A very, very significant outcome, a record level of turnout. We also talked about the obvious challenge of Syria. And this is of particular significance to Jordan because they have somewhere in the vicinity of 330,000, perhaps more, refugees We are currently engaged in a humanitarian effort directed at about 250,000 of them, with approximately $52 million or so from the American people in an effort to address this humanitarian challenge.
Lower House Speaker Saad Hail Isroor said legislation necessary to press ahead with comprehensive reform is in place. But the new legislature, he said, had a long way to go after amendment of the Constitution, which required amendment of many valid laws to fit the new Constitution. Isroor told a visiting Sudanese delegation led by Trade Minister Uthman al-Sharif the Independent Elections Commission had efficiently done its job in conducting last month's parliamentary elections, coming very close to international standards. Isroor also said Jordan is keen on maintaining strong ties with Sudan and would offer all available expertise to the African nation. The Sudani minister hailed Jordan's elections, which he said had won international acclaim as fair and transparent, expressing hope other regional countries would take the kingdom's model. In a meeting with Arab Parliamentary Union Secretary General Nuruddin Bushkoji, the House Speaker said Jordan's parliament will remain a key supporter of pan-Arab causes. Still in our local news, the Ministry of Education announced the results of the General Secondary School Certificate Exam or Tawjihi for the winter session. The results were announced hours earlier than scheduled, and the ministry feared the grades could be leaked. Minister of Education Wajih Awais said the results were posted on the ministry's website around 1 a.m., heeding to public demands not to announce them during the working day. He told a press conference that more than 164,000 students had sat the winter session exam in all scientific, literary, IT, health and vocational streams, as well as private education. The percentages of those who passed, he added, varied from one stream to another, but they were lower than last year's for the scientific branch. Awais also told reporters an education reform plan drawn up by the ministry is still underway and appraisal pending national and popular approval. As soon as students learned about their exam results in the early morning hours, celebratory fire and fireworks went up the night sky as drivers honked their horns, breaking early morning quiet. The Public Security Department announced it will crack down on wild celebrations and had recorded about 400 dangerous violations. The security offences range from driving in convoys and disrupting traffic to reckless driving. Over 7,000 Syrians have crossed into Jordan in the past week in a new surge of refugees fleeing the conflict in Syria. Relief agencies have called for aid to the kingdom to help it cope with the influx. Farah Ajlouni has an update.
Syrian refugees pour into the Zaatri refugee camp. Over 110,000 displaced people are already living in the camp in the northern Mafraq governorate. Refugees have been crossing into the kingdom at a pace of over 2,000 a day during the past 2 months, and most of them have settled in the Zaatri. According to the General Command of Jordanian Armed Forces, up to 7,629 Syrians entered the kingdom during this week. They said the growing numbers had put huge pressures on the border guard, who helped them to access the border and provided aid and transportation to them. Among the refugees entering are many injured and sick people. The camp was first opened in July 2012 to host Syrians fleeing the violence in the ongoing Syrian civil war that erupted in 2011. It was designed to accommodate 120,000 people. International aid materials at the refugee camp cannot meet the need of the dramatically increasing refugee population. The newly arrived have to wait at least 1 week before getting basic necessities. This man's family has been in the camp for 1 month, and the only aid they have received was a kilt for each of the family members.
There are a limited number of pancakes, and every day we get 3 to 4 each person, and that's not enough. We have to buy more on the market at a price of 85 piastres.
A delegation of 4 members of the European Parliament said Jordan is already paying a high price for hosting the refugees, commending the humanitarian aid and support the kingdom is providing to this vulnerable group. A member in the mission said more than 60% of the Zaatari refugee camp residents are children, and it's particularly hard to run a camp with such challenges. The influx of refugees is increasing on a daily basis, and keeping up the humanitarian assistance supply poses a huge burden on the local authorities. Farah Ajlouni for the news at 10.
British Foreign Secretary William Hague warned that the longer Syria's conflict goes on, the greater the risk it will breed a new generation of militants who will pose a threat to Europe. In Syria, the conflict rages around Damascus and in Deir ez-Zor. Iran, meanwhile, said rebels battling the Syrian regime were behind the killing of an Iranian Revolutionary Guard commander who was ambushed yesterday. Zain Abu Sufa reports on the ongoing violence.
Syrian regime aircraft continue attacking rebel-held areas throughout the country. Another airstrike hits Jobar, near the capital Damascus, causing more damage. Smoke also rises in Deir ez-Zor and eastern Ghouta as fighter jets roar in the sky. At least 100 government soldiers and 30 rebels are reported to have died in 3 days of fighting in a town near the Iraqi border taken by insurgents. Rebels seized the town of Shaddada in the eastern oil-producing Hasaka province from government forces, bringing the rebels closer to the provincial capital Hasaka, 45 kilometers to the north. Close to the Lebanese border, an Iranian Revolutionary Guard commander in charge of Tehran's assistance in Lebanon was killed. Tehran accused Syrian rebels of being behind the assassination. The Iranian embassy in Lebanon said Hissam Kashnavis was killed as he returned to Beirut from Damascus. On the other side of the border, protesters in northern Lebanon blocked their border crossing with Syria to stop fuel shipments they said were being used to resupply President Bashar al-Assad's military. Around 30 trucks were forced to stop, and at one stage only pedestrians were able to cross over.
Today we are seeing that the Syrian regime and Lebanese regime that both pour into the Iranian regime at the end of the day are transferring diesel to Syrian tanks, trucks and military vehicles from Lebanon to the inside of the Syrian territories to kill the Syrian people.
The blockade was lifted at least partly after several hours, but it is not clear if all the trucks are able to cross. Zain Abu Sufa, News at 10.
Jewish vandals spray-painted "Death to the Arabs" and anti-Muslim graffiti on graves in a Muslim cemetery in Jerusalem. The words "price tag" were also sprayed in Hebrew on one of the 10 desecrated headstones. Price tag is a slogan adopted by militant Jewish settlers who say they will retaliate for any attempt by the Israeli government to curb settlement in the occupied West Bank. The incident comes a day after the Israeli military evacuated a settler outpost in the West Bank. A police spokesman confirmed the incident took place at a Muslim cemetery in Jerusalem's city center and said police were investigating and searching for suspects. Such attacks in the past involved the vandalism or destruction of Palestinian property, including mosques, olive trees and vehicles. South African Blade Runner Oscar Pistorius, a double amputee who became one of the biggest names in world athletics, will appear in court after being charged with murdering his girlfriend. Police said they had opened a murder case after a 30-year-old woman was found dead at the Paralympic and Olympic Stars house in Pretoria. According to the police, Pistorius and his girlfriend, model Reva Steenkamp, had been the only people in the house at the time of the shooting. Pistorius is a sports icon who triumphed over disability to compete with able-bodied athletes at the Olympics. A French investigation into how horse meat found its way into ready meals in Europe found that a French processing company sold as beef what could have been horse meat. But the company denied this. Meantime, a British parliamentary report into this scandal says discoveries so far of horse meat in products sold as beef are likely to be the tip of the iceberg. This report has more on the Europe-wide scandal.
A return to the traditional butcher. The growing Europe-wide scandal of horse meat sold as beef has made some consumers change their shopping habits, says Danny Lidgate.
We found some growth in products like minced beef, pies and sausages, and people now trust their local butchers much more.
Frozen burgers and lasagnas have been removed from supermarket shelves. Customers want to know where their food comes from.
I don't buy any more processed foods, any pies or anything like that, unless if I can see what the meat really looks like.
I nearly always buy fresh meat.
Work has been temporarily stopped at this slaughterhouse in northern England and a meat processing plant in Wales after a raid by police and food regulators. Horse meat had already been found in frozen food sold as beef in Britain and France. That meat was traced back to Romania. It's not illegal to sell horse meat in Britain, but it's rarely eaten there. The scandal has exposed flaws in food safety controls, and it's brought home to consumers the long and complex journey processed food makes between the slaughterhouse and our plates. European Union officials are meeting in Brussels to discuss the horse meat affair and are expected to introduce tougher food testing.
And it's Valentine's Day. Thousands of women danced on the streets of Istanbul and London as part of a 1 Billion Rising, an initiative driven by a play that aims to help end violence against women. Women and girls of all ages gathered in various squares around the world and around major cities, some carrying "No to Violence Against Women" banners as they danced. 1 Billion Rising is an international campaign hoping it will help end violence against women by raising awareness through creative action and dance. And to some NBA action, the Milwaukee Bucks hosted the Philadelphia 76ers in the final contest for both teams before the All-Star break. The majority of the early portions of the match were dominated by the 76ers. Drew Holiday buried a three-point bucket to give his side a 36-25 lead. With the half coming to a close, Milwaukee point guard Brandon Jennings excited the crowd with his dribbling skills. Philadelphia held on for a 75-72 lead at the end of the third quarter. But less than 2 minutes left, Monte Ellis restored a slim Milwaukee lead with a layup. The win marked the 10th time this season that the Bucks have won after rallying from a deficit of 10 or more. Spain's World Cup winning coach, Vicente Del Bosque, unveiled his statue at the Madrid Wax Museum. Del Bosque joins Fernando Torres, David Villa, Iker Casillas and Andres Iniesta from the 2010 World Cup winning side in having his statue at the Wax Museum. For the Spain coach, the statue was a personal recognition at the same time that it was a recognition for the team's success. And over to the weather outlook. Cold tonight with southwesterly light to moderate winds. Tomorrow temperatures will drop slightly with a relatively cold day and cloudy skies and scattered showers in northern parts, spreading to central areas in the evening hours. Winds will be westerly moderate, turning brisk in the afternoon and dusty in the Badia desert areas. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect a relatively cold night but fair tomorrow with northerly moderate winds and calm seas. Here's a quick look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. To close, here's a recap of the top stories. His Majesty the King joins ex-servicemen at a ceremony marking National Veterans Day. The Foreign Minister and the US Secretary of State say efforts should be stepped up to kickstart Middle East peace talks and call for a political solution in Syria. And the Syrian refugee population in the kingdom is rapidly growing, with an average of 2,000 crossing every day. With that, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Ra'ad Labtoush. Thank you for watching. Have a good night, and I'll see you tomorrow.